Hello guys and welcome back. So this is the high-res render. I changed the resolution to 1920 by 1080. You can see we're getting all the cool details in there, getting the volume, getting the color variation here, which is pretty cool. So now we're going to start rendering the foam, and I'm going to go to the object level and let's create a new geo node. Call this foam, or let's call this foam bubble prep, because we're gonna prepare the data for both of these guys. And I'm going to load in the cache. Okay, and if we middle click, you see we have bubbles, foam, and spray. Now in this example, I think spray is not that big of a deal. It doesn't have a lot of points, and I'm going to, for now, isolate the foam. Delete non-selected, and this is our foam path. Let's change this to pixels. And this is what we have so far. Now, one thing, I'm gonna save you guys a little bit of time here instead of doing test renders and seeing issues. One thing that I don't like, or actually it's better to remove and get rid of, is these points here, because no matter what the scale you're gonna have is, you're gonna end up with points like that. Okay, now we can run the neighboring algorithm that we created in week 4 to isolate these guys, which could work real nicely. But remember, we kept an attribute called foam density when we did the whitewater sim in the solver. And that's what we're going to use. I'm going to create a color node. I'm going to say ramp from attribute, and I want to visualize this foam density attribute. Okay, let's say 0 to 10. We're starting to see black points in there. Set this to 100. Cool. So it looks like it's what we need to isolate these guys. Okay, let's set this to red, and let's set this to blue, so we can clearly see the difference. So that's where we have high density, and the red is where we have low density, but the 100 is quite extreme. Let's set it to 0.10. There we go. Maybe 0, even 0.5, 0.8. And we can either delete them completely or use this information as a multiplier for the p-scale, so that when they get separated, they slowly go to 0. They slowly lose the p-scale. They basically go to 0. But first, I want to set a global p-scale on everything. So let's create that. P-scale is basically what determines the size of the points. I'm going to start with 0.2 on all of them, and then later we'll have a multiplier at the upper level, which we know about already. So let's create a point bob, and I want to do this, repeat the same thing here. Let's do a bind. Let's import that foam density. Do a fit range. I have short memories, so I don't remember the range. Okay, and so this is going to be the input. So 0 to 8, and I want to multiply the p-scale with this. So bind p-scale. I'm going to multiply that with this, so that when they get separated, they shrink and go to 0. Let's bind export the p-scale again. Okay, now we have our foam pret. Let's create a null out foam, and let's go back up and let's create a geometry node, and let's call this foam ren ready. Okay, and let's go to the material, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom shader, and this is something we did in week 4. That the isotropic volume rendering technique, we're going to reuse that. So material builder, call this foam volume, because we're going to render it like a volume, but with points we need to use this a different shader. So it's a lighting model. I'm going to set this to isotropic volume, and I'm going to set the ambient to 1.1, diffuse to 2.2. I'll explain why in a second, and specular to 1.1, even though it's not going to be very visible. Let's connect these guys, and let's go back to the foam volume. I'm going to go under geometry, and instead of render only points, I'm going to set this to render points only, to make sure that it will only get points from there. Now this render points as, we can either choose circles or spheres. It affects the look, so I highly encourage you guys to test both of them and see which one works better for you. I'm going to go back to the out context. Let's delete this, we don't need. I'm going to call this foam shading, and I don't need any of these guys for now. And let's call the foam ren ready. Okay, I'm going to increase the resolution a bit, as well as the shading settings, because these are fine points, so it may be harder to see them. And I think, yeah, I did not add the geometry, so let's create an object merge and drag this in here. Let's copy this guy, and we have that, and let's hit render. Cool. So this is our particle rendering, and as you can see, we're not getting any well, we are getting, there is these points, but they're going to disappear very soon. So right now the size is quite big, the point size is quite big, so I'm going to add a multiplier using this point scale here. I'm going to set this to 0.1. Cool. So there we go. That's our volume rendering for the particles using volumes. So one last thing I want to do, it's very, very crucial to turn on motion blur, because it helps to see all these noise and stuff. It's gonna help smooth that out. And sometimes, if you can afford it, it would be better to increase the amount of velocity you have on the foam, just to blur them a bit more and get some nicer and softer particles. Actually, let's do that here. I'm gonna take the velocity vector and just multiply it by 2. And let's go back. And actually, we're not done. I thought I'm going to set this to 8 by 8. I'm going to hit render. And right now we're seeing the particles without any matte. If there is any foam that is underneath the water, we're seeing that now. So we don't want that. We want to use the geometry of the water as a matte, as well as the environment, and that will give us our pass. And as you can see, the foam now with the blur, it's a bit extreme, I'd say, but it definitely helps blur in any noise or any small points. As you can see, we're not getting any of that of those separated points. Actually, let's turn that cool trick we did off and do a test with without that. So P scale here under the prep. Let's remove that. And let's copy this. Let's do another render. And one last thing, I'm going to isolate the spray and add them with the foam as well. So because I want the paths to include both of them. I'm going to copy this over here. I'm going to say foam and spray. And that's going to add any spray. We don't have a lot because, again, there's not so much spray happening in this scene. But yeah. So this is with the density trick, foam density trick off. You can see we're getting all these weird particles, and it's really hard to increase the count of the particles to fix that because they are very separated, and the best way to do it is to clean and sharpen it using this technique. Let's see. Okay, now one last thing, we want to we added the foam, the spray. Okay, and I want to set this properly, so let's call this foam beauty, and this is going to be my foam pass. I want to render this, and I want to use the matte to be the water. That would be, first we need the geo of the statue, the fluid mesh, no need for foam or anything, and I'm going to use the low res environment. And let's hit render. We're going to notice a little bit of difference here. We're going to see some clamps. Maybe here we're going to get a it's going to trim the outer layer, maybe here, because some particles can go underneath the water surface, and that's just the nature of the sim. We could obviously sample those and find the points that are inside, but I think it's fine. So that's the statue being used as a mat, and all this is behind. Okay. We're also adding the density back, so that may change the look of things a bit. Here it's the statue, the statue, and it could be water as well. Here's the environment. Some water splashes on top, and this is our foam pass ready to go. That's all we need. Okay, now the next thing we want to do, check the time quickly. Yeah, I think we can do it now. So the next thing we want is the bubble. So for the bubbles, I'm going to remove all these guys. I'm going to copy this, call this bubbles ran ready, and let's go back here to the prep, and I'm going to use the same trick. Just isolate the bubbles, and these are the bubbles. And let's take a look at the density as well. I think this is a bit extreme. It may not work as expected, because bubbles tend to be very well separated, so we may not use this technique. So actually, let's not do the deletion or the variation of the P scale based on the density for the bubbles. So let's copy that. And bubbles ran. Let's increase the velocity as well for these guys. And remember, we have a multiplier for the P scale set to 0.1. Here I'm going to increase it to 1.5. And for the volume, for the shader, I'm going to copy it, and let's call it bubbles volume, just in case we wanted to make changes. Another thing that I did as well, and is to use a simple diffuse shader on the bubbles rather than this volume, which is a little bit more expensive. Okay, so let's go back to the out context, and I only want the bubbles. Okay, nothing else. And let's hit render, see what we get. Cool, so I think the point size may be a little bit big. But this is how much bubbles we have. This is, I think, the impact points where the statue is gonna come out. I think the point size is quite big. Yeah, it's definitely big. So let's reduce that to maybe half of this, even more, and add something else to the environment. So here I'm gonna lower it 3 times. And let me check. 0.02. Yeah, definitely this is helping. So, you know, I'm gonna use this. I'm gonna introduce it back. So 0.5 here. 0 to 0.5. But instead of multiplying it to 0, I'm gonna just set them to maybe 3 times smaller. So instead of completely zeroing out the p scale, I'm gonna keep 30% of that. Okay, so the other thing is we're never going to see the bubbles like this. We're never going to render them by themselves. So the way we actually render them is by setting them to forced phantom. And I'm gonna go to the forced object, and I want the water mesh. So ren fluid mesh and the environment, and later we'll add the statue, and let's add the low res geo, and later we will add the volume. I just want to do a test without the volume for now. And let me turn off motion blur, lower the resolution so it's faster, and let's do a quick render. And this is how it works. We render the bubbles with the environment, so this is going to be our main beauty, and this is going to include the water plus inv plus statue plus bubbles being refracted. Okay, then we have a separate pass for the just foam being matted out. Okay, now if we want to separate the environment, that's fine. We can do that. We just copy this. Let's call this 2. So this is our main beauty. We don't want the statue in there, so I'm gonna set it to forced matte. We don't want the environment, so I'm gonna set it to forced matte. And this is going to be water beauty, and this is going to contain water plus bubbles. Okay, and then we want the environment, which is basically the rest. So for the environment, I'm going to set the forced phantom to be the bubbles and the fluid mesh. Actually, we don't need the bubble because they're not going to affect the environment that much, and I want to render these guys. Okay, so the water mesh is going to cast shadows onto the environment, and that's it. These are the main passes. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is with the bubble underneath, and you can see they're visible. Maybe we can increase the point size back because they're completely gone now, and it's all here as well. You can see it's not visible on top or anything, and that's how we render the bubbles. So let's go back and increase the point size back to 1.5. And I'm going to add the I'm going to add the volume. So ran water volume. Okay, so these two phantoms, the volume and the bubbles, this is going to be the matte, which is the environment and the statue, and this is the main water. Okay, let's hit render, take a look at that, and this is going to be the foam. So for the foam, actually no, this is not the foam, sorry. This is the foam beauty. I'm gonna call this 8. Yeah, and it has the foam, and then it's been matted out by everything else. Cool. So that we have more bubbles now visible. We have a volume added, and this is the water. Okay, so I'm going to render 3 frames to disk, and actually let's do it now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the image under extra image planes, going to add custom AUV, and what I'm going to do, let's copy this here, I'm going to add combined lighting per light. And what this will give me is it's going to give me the lighting result of each light, which is very, very interesting. I'm also going to turn on these 3 guys, points and shading and the normals, and then we want the combined direct lighting per component and indirect lighting, and this is going to give us the diffuse, refraction, everything else we want. Now obviously this we want for the water as well, so let's do the same thing. We could also take this on. It's going to give us the result of all the components, and then for the AUV we're going to add the combined lighting, all, and for the environment I don't care, actually let's do it. So here okay, and I'm going to set the output path for all of them to render week 8 and $OS. And this is going to be imp beauty, okay, water beauty, and main. Let's copy this. And let's select all of them. I'm going to increase the resolution to 1440 by 810. It's just a bit higher than half HD. For the settings, let's keep 8 for all of them. That's fine. And I'm going to turn on motion blur, and that's it. I'm going to chain them like that. I'm going to set the frame to 102. We keep it the same. 102 and 102. And let's hit render to disk. I'll continue in the next video. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in a bit.